Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into something that is absolutely fundamental to how our global engine actually operates. We're looking at the fascinating interdependence of our three main economic sectors. We hear about agriculture, manufacturing, and services all the time, kind of like they're totally isolated worlds. But the reality? They are locked together in this highly complementary economic web.
So, think about this for a second. Can any economic sector survive entirely alone? Like, could agriculture just exist in a bubble? Could a factory just churn out goods without any outside help whatsoever? We naturally tend to categorize things because, well, it makes them easier to understand. But today, I really want to challenge those assumptions. We're going to use an ecosystem metaphor to see exactly why isolation in the economy is, quite literally, impossible.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. First, we'll hit the core principle of interdependence. Then, we'll look at the specific needs of the primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors one by one. Finally, we'll bring the whole thing together to visualize the complete circular flow.
Starting right off with Section 1, the core principle of total interdependence. The biggest thing to grasp right out of the gate is that these sectors don't just happen to exist next to each other. Interdependence literally means that the development of one sector directly depends on the others. They absolutely cannot exist in a vacuum. The growth, the efficiency, the whole shebang of one sector is completely reliant on the output of the other two.
Moving right along to Section 2, primary sector needs.
Let's isolate our first hub here, the primary sector, which is mainly agriculture. To run a modern farm, this sector needs some really essential inputs from the secondary or industrial sector. We're talking about manufactured goods, things like fertilizers and pesticides just to grow the crops, pump sets for irrigation, and of course tractors to work the land.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer physical scale of these dependencies. Tractors and fertilizers, these are massive, complex, manufactured products. They are concrete evidence that a farmer working the land is entirely reliant on the heavy industrial output of the secondary sector just to produce a yield in the first place.
But, manufacturing isn't enough on its own. The primary sector also deeply needs the tertiary or service sector. Just look at these requirements. A farmer needs transport to get their agricultural products out of the fields and actually to the markets. They need communication services. They need banking to finance their seeds and equipment. And they desperately need insurance facilities to protect against, say, a crop failure. Without these crucial services, the primary sector just couldn't operate efficiently or protect its hard-earned assets.
Let's shift gears to Section 3, secondary sector needs.
Now we're looking at our manufacturing base. To build anything, you need raw materials, right? Well, the secondary sector gets its essential supply directly from the primary sector. We're looking at materials like cotton, jute, sugarcane, oilseeds, and wool.
I mean, think about it. A massive multi-million-dollar textile factory is literally just an empty building without raw cotton or wool pulled straight from a farm. A huge industrial sugar mill, completely useless without raw sugarcane harvested from the earth. The entire manufacturing sector's existence is completely predicated on the primary sector successfully extracting these raw materials first. And okay, once those raw materials are actually transformed into finished products, the secondary sector hits another wall if it doesn't have the tertiary sector. Factories absolutely rely on service support. They need transport to move those manufactured goods. They need storage and godowns to hold their inventory. They need communication networks to manage complex supply chains. And exactly like the farmers, they require banking and insurance to finance and protect their massive industrial operations. They rely on these services to successfully produce and, ultimately, sell their goods.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, Section 4, tertiary sector needs.
Now, the tertiary sector doesn't produce physical goods itself, but it still fundamentally relies on the first two sectors to even exist. Let's start with the most basic need of all. The people working in services, the bankers, the truck drivers, the communication engineers, they all depend directly on the primary sector for food. It really is that simple. Without the agricultural output of the primary sector, the workforce powering the service sector simply couldn't survive.
Furthermore, the tertiary sector is highly dependent on the secondary sector for the actual tools of its trade. Think about the physical items you need to perform a service. You need manufactured physical goods. You need computers and calculators for banking and communication. You need books and stationery for education. And you obviously need trucks and transport vehicles to provide logistics services.
I really want to highlight these items powerfully because they prove a vital point. Even highly intangible services require tangible, manufactured goods to function in the real world.
You can't run a global communication network without the physical computers built by the secondary sector. And you definitely can't offer a transportation service without the actual trucks rolling off an assembly line.
Let's wrap this all up in Section 5, the circular flow.
So let's weave these individual dependencies together to see the big picture. Primary goods act kind of like the base, flowing outwards to both the secondary and tertiary sectors. Manufactured products flow between the primary and secondary sectors. And finally, the services from the tertiary sector flow backwards in a loop to support both of those production sectors.
And this brilliantly illustrates the whole concept. Just trace the flow with me for a second. Notice how primary goods flow outwards to the right. See how products point back and forth between the primary and secondary sectors, representing, say, raw cotton going one way and tractors returning the other. And then on the far right, services point backwards from the tertiary block, feeding directly into both the primary and secondary blocks. It is a continuous, perfectly balanced loop, a true economic web.
So what does this all mean? This brings us to a really critical thought. If this is truly a circular flow, completely reliant on interdependence, if one sector fails, what happens to the rest of the web? Well, if agriculture stops, the factories have no materials, and the service workers have no food. If manufacturing stops, farmers have no tractors and bankers have no computers. And if services stop, goods can't move and money can't flow. They are absolutely all in it together. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this completely changes how you view the economic engines running our world. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.